A little background about sign language. In this country, a lot of us speak English. This country, of course, is the stuff on the left here, as remembered by someone who lives in this country. All of the stuff in the middle is Nebraska. There's Ohio up there. OH. I heard that worked. Matt Wazowski, your city's up here somewhere. We're near New NJ or something. Anyway, so you would think that our American Sign Language, what people who are not hearing here, or are D or capital D deaf in the US speak, it would be American Sign Language. There's a lot of that. You would think maybe that's related to British Sign Language, since except for some difficulties I have with British friends talking, we do supposedly speak the same language. So here on their island of cheese, you would expect to see some similarities. It's not the case. American Sign Language actually has a lot more in common, I learned while researching, looking around for a sign language talk, with the French Sign Language, which is popularly known. It has everything to do with this guy, an American, although a suspiciously francophone American. His last, this is Thomas Hopkins. I think he might say Galladay or Gallaudet. So here is this guy. So here this guy moved from, or took himself across the Atlantic from the United Shapes of America on the left here, over to the big cheese island. And he met there with the guy who was sort of the first person to come up with a really great system. He's like, here, let's teach all of these people who can't hear, we'll teach them to read lips and to spell everything out laboriously with their hands. Great system. Well, it was better than not being able to communicate. So on the cheese island, there was Thomas Braidwood, here are the years, and he was running Braidwood's Academy for the Deaf and Dumb, not a term we would use anymore. Since 1706 he'd been at it. So Gallaudet comes over and he says, hey, maybe you could teach me some of this and I could take it back. But they refused to teach him. Luckily, while he was there, he ran into Mr. Cissart here, who went to the Cheese Hexagon, France, and there at his area, they could say a thing or two, and they're like, we have this whole manual language, and you can just use your hands. And he's like, oh, that works very well. And in fact, people at the school here, at the Institution Nationale Soir à Paris, all were very happy to come back to the US with him and help him to found the Connecticut Asylum at Hartford for the education and instruction of deaf and dumb persons, which is a slightly more PC name. And this was the beginning of American Sign Language as we know it now. And that's probably how these people are all yelling at each other in the kitchen, very silently. All of which is just a tangent, because we're going to switch to the next set of slides and introduce Katie Jepsen, who knows about Al-Sayyid Bedouin Sign Language.
I'm Katie Jepsen. I will talk to you about Al-Sayyid Bedouin Sign Language. And before I talk, I wanted to ask, does anyone know sign language in here? Somebody back there. All right, so all questions about sign language will go to the young lady back there because I don't actually speak sign language. I just have read a lot about Al-Sayyid Bedouin Sign Language, which is very good. Oh, and I wanted to mention that a lot of what I'm going to talk about comes from research by Carol Padden, Mark Aronoff, Wendy Sandler, and Irit Meyer, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but they are American and Israeli researchers who are some of the experts on this language, and I had the great fortune of getting to meet them. Okay, so let's start. Al-Sayyid is a village in the Negev Desert in Israel. It's kind of in southern Israel. If you look at the map, it's about in the middle. And the story of how Al-Sayyid came to be is that there was a man from Egypt. He came to the Negev Desert, met a woman, they got married, they had a family who looked nothing like this. They may have had a dog, I don't know. But they had lots of children, and 2 of those children were deaf. And this is because they had a recessive gene in their family that caused deafness. So those kids had some more kids of their own later, they met some other people, the village kept going, and eventually there was a good population of people. But the thing about this village is that the neighboring villages thought, oh, these people are weird, they're from somewhere else, we don't really like them. So finding somebody to marry was kind of hard. So there was a lot of people who just had to marry a cousin. So you've got this recessive gene, you've got a lot of cousins marrying cousins, and you end up with a community with lots of deafness. All right, so this is what Al-Sayyid looks like today, and it's got about 4% of the population that's deaf. So that's about 130 people out of 330 people, or sorry, 3,300 people in the village. I do know math a little better than that. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you consider in the US, Gallaudet University, named after Mr. Gallaudet there, did a study and they found that about 0.07% of Americans are either deaf or hard of hearing. So that doesn't necessarily mean you know sign language even. So that's 4% is pretty good. So you've got all these people in the same village, lots of people who are deaf, and you've got the perfect conditions for a village sign language. Village sign language is a language used by both deaf and hearing people in a community. It usually comes in a community that's small, insular, has a large population of deaf people. And in such a community, signing isn't stigmatized. So if you're deaf, you're a member of the community. There's no difference between hearing and deaf people. You all talk to each other. People speak Arabic in the community, but they also speak Al-Sayyid Bedouin sign language. A couple more things about it. It's about 75 years old. It's on its 4th generation. And you could say that it was made from scratch. So nobody came into this village from outside and said, here's this great language, sign language, and I'm going to teach it to you, and you can all communicate with each other. Nobody did that for them. So if you have a bunch of people who are all together and they need to communicate, they find a way, and that's how languages form. So this is really a unique situation where it shows you how a language can be born. And it's totally different. People speak Arabic, but the word order is different. It has different grammatical rules from Arabic and also from Hebrew and also from Israeli Sign Language. Let me tell you a little bit about Israeli Sign Language as well. Israeli Sign Language is a deaf community sign language, which means that it's primarily spoken by deaf people. So American Sign Language is an example of a deaf community sign language. It usually comes whenever you get a whole bunch of kind of unrelated deaf people, put them all together, they all need to talk to each other, then a sign language will arise. It usually forms around schools, associations, and clubs. And in Israel, this happened because they opened a couple of schools in the 1930s. And they had kind of that same idea that we're going to get everybody together, all these kids from all around Europe, Northern Africa, the Middle East. People are coming in with all their different sign languages, and we're going to tell them not to sign. So instead, we're just going to tell them you have to learn how to lip read and you have to pretend that you can't sign. So I don't know if anybody has ever had to tell a whole big group of kids not to talk. It did not work. So of course, all the kids got together in the school and in the dorms, and they came up with a language. A couple more things about it. It's about 75 years old, and it has about 10,000 speakers, so a lot more than Al-Sayyid Bedouin language. Okay, so the researchers I mentioned earlier decided they've got these 2 languages. They're both about 75 years old. What a great opportunity to see how they're different from each other. And why? Because, as I said, village sign language, it's kind of like watching the birth of a language. This is a way that you can see language arising from nothing. Israeli Sign Language, on the other hand, is more like the languages that we speak today. Hearing people speak, English didn't just arise from nowhere. English was a mashup of a bunch of other languages that came before it. So we've got these examples of 2 languages forming these 2 different ways. They're about the same age. How do they compare? For the first one, they use space differently. Can anybody in the room tell me how to get to Jerusalem? And I don't mean like point me to O'Hare, but I mean if I wanted to just pick up and fly in a straight line right from here to Jerusalem, which way? That way. All right, that way. I'm being told that way. So this is a good thing to know if you ever want to learn Al-Sayyid Bedouin Sign Language, because the sign for Jerusalem is you make the sign for prayer, which may be this, I'm just making this up. I just saw a description of what it looks like, but sign for prayer, and then you point at Jerusalem. And the person you're talking to has to know where Jerusalem is too. And if they don't, or if you say it wrong, they're not going to understand you. And maybe they'll correct you, or maybe they'll just think you're confused. And there are a lot of these signs. So if you want to talk about Lebanon, you have a big beard and you point at Lebanon. If you want to talk about Jordan, you say head medallion, you point at Jordan. And if you want to talk about America, and again, I just saw the descriptions of these signs, I didn't see a picture, but all it said was, wide hat, point at America. So I don't know if it's like a cowboy hat or like a baseball hat, but we're all about hats in America to the AlSayyid people. By comparison, ISL uses space in a different way because, when you think about it, if you are in this community with just a very small number of people and you're talking to them, you all grew up together, you all have the same reference points. If you want to talk about your friend Sarah, which is totally not a Bedouin name as far as I know, but if you want to talk about your friend Sarah, then you can just point at her house. And everybody knows, yes, we all grew up with Sarah, we know Sarah, that's where she lives, and they all understand you. But if you try to do that in Israeli Sign Language, then people are just going to look at you like you're strange, because 10,000 people speak this language, and 10,000 people probably don't know Sarah. So if you speak this, you're going to have to speak in a different way. Israeli Sign Language uses relative space, so it's more the way that I talk and probably you, because we speak English. If I want to talk about where an L stop is, I might say like, here's Willis Tower, and here's the L stop. And that doesn't indicate where the Willis Tower is from here. And I honestly couldn't even tell you because I have a terrible sense of direction. I know it's like right around the corner, but I can give you my map here. Like, this is Willis Tower, this is the L stop, and I can communicate that way. Another thing that was different was the degree of variation between speakers. So what do you think, between ABSL and ISL, which one would have the greater amount of variation from speaker to speaker? Israeli, I heard. Sorry to say you're wrong. It's actually Al-Sayyid Bedouin Sign Language. And the reason that the researchers think this is true is kind of that same thing with our friend Sarah. If she has a cute sign for dog that she does that everybody knows, like, oh, that's how Sarah says dog, then she can get away with that because everybody knows Sarah. Everybody thinks she's fine, and she can talk about dogs however she wants. That doesn't mean I have to say the same sign for dog. I understand her. But again, if you're in Israeli Sign Language, you have 10,000 people to talk to, and if you have a special sign that your friends know, that doesn't mean they know. So there's actually a lot more standardization in the bigger language group. So this is kind of related, but the rate of change of the language was the third and final thing I'm going to talk about. How the language changes from generation to generation. As languages get more complex, these are pretty young languages, and between the second and third and fourth generations, they'll be able to speak in more complex sentences and new grammar arises. So which one, well, okay, I kind of got the answer there, but which one do you think it would develop more quickly? You might think ABSL, but it's not. It's actually, it's ISL, sorry. Trick questions, yes. So ABSL, they think that the reason that ISL actually matures faster is because of the same thing we've been talking about. So we've got all these people putting inputs into this language. And if people want to understand each other, things have to catch on. So you see this in English, in any language that you speak. There will be new words. Suddenly everybody knows what twerking is. And that just, it happens. And so if you've got a bunch of people putting input into this language, not everything's going to catch on, but you have enough chances for things to catch on that you can have changes occur. And when they do occur, you've got 10,000 people behind it, and they'll reinforce it. With ABSL, somebody might come up with a new word, and everyone thinks that's great, but they don't necessarily adopt it because everybody understands you. Okay, so why do we care about this? The researchers think that this can tell us something about early language, because anthropologists think that early human groups were small. So it's just a tiny group hunting and gathering and surviving together, and you had to communicate with each other about that. And so this was probably kind of like a village sign language or just a village language. They think that in early language there was probably a lot of variation from speaker to speaker. just like in ABSL. They think that changes probably happen a little slower, and that, what was the third thing? But basically, I think it was like ABSL. And then the group starts to get bigger. So once your language group starts to grow, it kind of starts to become more like Israeli Sign Language, or more of a larger space. So you've got more people having to talk, so the language gets more standardized. But it also speeds up in how it matures. And then the third thing that people talked about in some papers that I read about this was that possibly after the language group expands even further, then it kind of splits off into little groups. So some people might live in this geographic area, some people live over here, and the variation can come back. Okay, so that was the last thing about the research, but I wanted to take you back to AlSayyid for the last slide, just to let you know what's going on there. So these researchers I talked to said when they started going around 2004, 2005, there was no running water, there was no consistent electricity, it was just very rural, very isolated place, and it was very strange for them to show up. But then, just about 10 years later, kids have iPhones. There's a McDonald's 20 minutes away, there's running water, there's electricity, it's kind of integrated with the rest of society. And people go out to other villages to work, and the kids, the deaf kids, will go to the deaf schools. And there they learn Israeli Sign Language. So you might think, oh, well, this is the death of Al-Sayyid Bedouin Sign Language because they're going off and learning this other language that everybody speaks. But the interesting thing is they go off to these schools and learn, but they come home and their hearing friends and family haven't learned Israeli Sign Language. And so if they want to talk to them, they have to go back to ABSL. So I just thought that was really interesting, that the thing that's keeping it alive is the fact that everybody speaks it. So that's the last thing I wanted to tell you about that. Thanks. Are there any questions for me and our sign language speaker in the back? Yeah, so the question is, right now the kids are all coming home and speaking ABSL with their friends and family, but is there the risk that after this generation grows up and the next generations are all going to school and learning ISL, that ABSL will die out? And yes, that's often what happens with village sign languages, is as soon as the village gets integrated, after a couple of generations, then the language will die out. So one interesting thing that I found out when I was researching this is that all sign languages are actually considered endangered at all times, even the huge ones, just because it's a smaller population of people speaking it. So that's one thing to consider. Thank you. The question was, is there a chance that it will just kind of become its own dialect, because there are some words in ABSL that don't exist in ISL and vice versa. And that does happen. I don't entirely know the answer to that, but I do know that it's really interesting that the kids who go to school and learn ISL, these researchers have spent a bunch of time talking to them in ABSL and in ISL, and they've noticed when they sign in ISL that they have an accent, which I didn't know was possible to have an accent in sign language, but of course you're going to have an accent in sign language. They said that in ABSL you see the back of the hand more often than in ISL, and when you're using your fingertips, it's more the pads of your fingers in ABSL and the tips in ISL. And so you'll see that they're already changing how they speak ISL, and I'm not sure exactly what will happen in the future with that, but it is interesting to see that they are already kind of mixing. I don't actually know. So the question was, has there been any kind of movement toward a global sign language? I don't know. Does our other, the person who speaks sign language know about that? There is a universal sign language. What? I'm so glad you're here.
Hi. There is a universal global sign language, that is correct.
What percentage of deaf people actually know? Okay.
I don't know.
Thank you. Okay, thanks.
And also I want to thank Katie Jepsen who has some titles to choose among. All right, so so far, sign language and how you too can sign for Nelson Mandela. Nerds should follow current events. Sign language or languages just happen, or humans always make languages that work for them. Also, shh, we're hunting languages. And finally, hand jobs, an anthropology of sign language. That kind of has the Nerd Night spirit of... You got a winner?
I also like the shush, we're hunting language. Yeah, I'm picking that one.
All right. Ben, come up here. We have a prize for you. In the meantime, you have another 15-minute break. We'll put it on the clock. That clock. Take the spirit and do it again. And then when we come back, we will be ready for our final speaker of the night. Go. Let's hear it for Katie Jepsen.